helps us identify what exactly it is that we're trying to accomplish in this whole realm of evangelism. So I was just thinking of the people that are on my list and trying to think of people who might be on your list and come up with some reasons of why these people are lost. Some people have intellectual objections to the gospel. So some of the people who are on our list in our circle who are not followers of Christ, they've got questions that they're asking. Perhaps they they just, how do I know there is a God? How can you prove that God exists? Or maybe they've been just drowning in our Darwinian evolutionary theory and think there's a natural explanation to everything, and so there's nothing outside of nature. Or maybe they're not convinced that there's evidences for the resurrection of Christ. Or how can you know that, yes, there is a God, but how do I know which presentation of God is the right understanding of God? They've got intellectual questions, intellectual objections, questions that keep them from becoming believers. And we live in a very interesting age. This manifests itself in different ways. You may have some people on your list, like I said, they have scientific questions, or other people on your list that have theological questions. You've got people on your list. We live in you've heard this term before, a kind of a cafeteria-style religion, where they go through the cafeteria line of all the different religions and they pick pieces out of each religion that they like, even though they are contradictory to each other. And so you've got some people who believe in karma and who believe in heaven at the same time. Even those are completely contradictory views of eternity. You know, karma is this idea that if you do more good than bad, you'll come back. You're reincarnated a step up on the notch. If you do more bad than good, you come back a step lower on the notch. And so they believe in karma, but at the same time, they believe in heaven. And those contradict each other. And you look at it and say, well, how can you believe both of those to be true? Well, in our culture, we have people who do that. So some people have intellectual objections to the gospel, and you're trying to share the gospel with them. Other people have moral objections to the gospel. They realize that if they're going to become a follower of Jesus Christ, that means submitting themselves to the authority of Christ in their life, and there's just certain things in life that they know that God through Jesus and the Bible say are morally wrong, and they don't want to abandon those things, and that keeps them from coming to the gospel. Now, best I can tell, in our culture's ethical standard is basically everything is okay as long as you don't hurt somebody else. That seems to be our culture's ethical standard. Everything's okay as long as you don't hurt somebody. Well, the ethical standard of the gospel is very different than that. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The ethical standard of the gospel is the beauty and greatness of who God is and what God does. And this whole understanding of what does it mean to hurt another person. Our culture is wrestling with that. But you're trying to share the gospel to people on your list, and quite frankly, they don't want to turn away from some of the things that they know they'll have to turn away from if they come to Jesus. So what does it mean to be an ambassador to Christ to them? You've got some people who, this whole idea of intolerance, one of the highest cultural values in our culture is the value of tolerance, with a twist, of course. Tolerance, according to the dictionary, is acceptance of someone else's beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors. But that's been twisted in our culture to say to be tolerant not only means to accept, but it means to endorse. It means to improve of. It probably means even to practice. If you don't practice it, you really don't tolerate it. And so Christianity, by that definition, we have to admit, is very intolerant. Jesus says, no one comes to the Father except through me. The gospel says there is one name under heaven by which men can be saved, the name Jesus Christ. In our culture, that doesn't sound very tolerant. That's not very accepting of other people's beliefs. And so as we share the gospel, you may have people on your list and they say, there's no way I can believe in a gospel that's intolerant, that narrow-minded, because tolerance is the most important thing to me. You may have others in your list that the most important thing that they're seeking in life is this whole idea of self-fulfillment or meaning in life or purpose in life or self-actualization or whatever phrase you want to call it. And they just cannot see how Jesus is going to help them find themselves in life. And we've got to be careful with this as we share the gospel with these people. Because on one hand, Jesus says, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. But on the other hand, Jesus says, if you want to follow me, you have to take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. Jesus says, if you want to if you want to keep your life in this world, you're actually going to end up losing your life. And if you want to find your life, you've got to lose it in this world. And so we can say to people, yes, in Christ you will find life and life abundantly, but at the same time you have to lose your life in this world. And our culture looks at that and says, what? I mean, think about how this sounds if you're a believer in Iraq this morning, one of these villages that are being persecuted for their faith. You can say to them, being a follower of Christ brings life indeed, but it does not make your life easier today or more pleasant today, but it brings life today. There's a difference. Our culture has a hard time understanding the difference. And so you may be sharing the gospel to someone who's on your list, and the most important thing to them is, I want to have a fulfilled life, and I don't see how Christ helps me get to that end. And you're trying to share Jesus with them. It may be that you have people on your list that, just to be honest, the only Christians that they know in their life have just been horrible examples of what it means to be a follower of Christ. They had a father who beat them in the name of God. Or the pastor of the church that grew up, embezzled a bunch of money from the church and ran away. Or whatever. They have someone in their life, very significant figure, who is just a very poor example of what it means to be a follower of Christ. And here you are trying to share the gospel with them, and they just keep bringing it and thinking of that person. How do you share the gospel with that person? Or it may be you just have someone in your list that you're praying for or thinking about, and they just have no interest in spiritual things. Nothing. I mean, I'm pretty much interested in sports, and if you want to have a conversation with me, I can really get into talking football with you, and baseball, basketball a little less, soccer about once every 4 years, until the U.S. gets kicked out of the tournament. Water polo, we're getting near the zero territory, but I can just tell you, if you want to talk opera, I pretty much have like a .0000000 whatever interest. I mean, some of you love it, and that's great, and I can have a polite conversation with you, but just interest level. And there's some people on your list that when you try to bring up spiritual things to them, it's like talking opera to me. Or maybe like talking football.